Hello, everybody. This is James Carr with the Albuquerque Astronomical Society, and welcome to After Sunset. This is a brief guide to night landscape photography. During the COVID crisis, there's been a lot of increase in the interest in astronomy, as well as taking images of the night sky. So I want to cover a few quick things and try and help get you off to a good start. First off, what is night landscape photography? It's very similar to daytime landscape, except it's being done after dark or after dusk. Secondly, you're going to be using much longer exposures than what you're accustomed to using. You're going to be pushing your camera to the limit of its capabilities. Unlike the daytime, when you have a guaranteed light source from the sun, at night you're going to have some very challenging light sources. And finally, you're going to be pushing your own limits, your own knowledge of photography. But one thing I can guarantee is that it's going to be fun. So let's take a quick peek and see how we can do this. First off, let's just kind of get an idea of where do you go to do night landscape? Well, first thing is you want to get away from the city if at all possible. Get away from the light pollution, the air pollution, anything that's going to cloud the sky with light or particles, because all of this will in turn take away the contrast and the beauty of your image. Secondly, go someplace where you have beautiful natural views. My rule of thumb is the place has to be somewhere that I would go during the daytime to take landscape shots. If they're good enough for the daytime, then you got a good start for nighttime. Next, make sure you've got plenty of space in your image. The night sky is huge. And as you start taking images that are incorporating the stars and things like that, you're going to want your landscape to be comparable to it. So make sure you've got a landscape in both design and in size that will complement the night sky. If you're looking to photograph the Milky Way, you're in luck. You've got a few months to hone your skills before that comes around. The main time, of course, is between the months of April and September. Once again, to me, one of the most important things is you've got to have a beautiful scene to make this work. Lastly, in your planning, because you don't want to just jump in your car and head out. You want to know where you're going, what to expect when you get there, and what it's going to look like. There is an app available called Photo Pills. It is going to cost a little bit, but trust me, it'll be well worth the expense for what you'll gain. Now, what kind of conditions are we looking for in going out to take night landscape shots? First and foremost, look at the moon. If the moon's high in the sky, it's going to flood your landscape with a soft, ghostly light, as it's nothing more than reflected sunlight. But that will give you some beauty. If the moon is rising or setting, then you're going to have some nice shadows, giving a lot of depth to your image. One thing you might want to consider is using an artificial light. You're going to want to have a headlamp with you anyway, so that's a possibility. Also, getting an off-camera flash that you can set off remotely and set it off somewhere to the side so that you get shadows to add the depth. You do not want to use the flash that came on your camera. A flash going straight out parallel with the lens is going to flatten your landscape, and you just won't be pleased with it. And again, cloudless skies with as little light and air pollution as possible. So let's get into the fun stuff. What do you need to have in the way of equipment to make this happen? Well, naturally, you've got to have a camera. Now, these days, most people have either a DSLR or a smartphone with a good camera. So that's obviously what we've got to start with. Some of the things you want to look for is, do you have the ability to shoot in a raw, what's called a raw file format? We won't get into a lot of that, but your camera otherwise is going to do its own processing. And 9 times out of 10, that's not the processing you want for this type of an image. If you have a phone, there are plenty of apps that you can download that will give you both not only the raw format, but many of the other abilities that you'll need to use your phone for this. Look to see if you have long exposure noise reduction. Every sensor has noise in it. And if you have this option, it's going to take a little longer for your shot to complete, but your camera can go in, identify the noise that your sensor has built in, and take that out of the image. It'll just save you some time and hassle later on. Next, you need to figure out how high can your ISO go. We'll discuss that here in a bit, but most of your shots are going to be looking at least 30, 60 seconds on varying lengths. So you're going to have access to bulb mode. There again, if you have a cell phone, some of the apps you can download, the one I use is called Moment. That will give you the raw file format. That'll give you the bulb. It'll give you ability to manually focus, change your ISO, change your aperture, everything you'll need. Another thing you might want to look at getting is a remote shutter. Believe it or not, when you're taking images of something as dim as the night sky, just the very act of using your finger to press the shutter button, be it your camera or your phone, is going to introduce vibration into the camera, which will in turn most likely introduce a blur to your image, and you won't be happy with it. So get some kind of a remote shutter, and that way you can trigger the camera without actually having to touch it. If you're wanting to take a lot of pictures, consider getting an intervalometer. That will allow you to do some programming within that device and have it run the camera through a series of images. So that's a nice addition. It can also be used as your remote shutter. Your battery. Make sure that your battery is strong. If the battery you're using has been around for a while, you might want to look at picking up a couple of new ones. The cold air is going to make your battery go down quicker. So you've got to have a good, strong battery. Let's flip on into the lens real quick here. You're looking for what's called a wide lens or a fast lens. Your aperture should be able to going down to at least 3.5 and possibly on down to as low as 1.4. The lower the number, the more data you can get in a quicker amount of time. You need to make sure it's got manual focus. Your automatic focus is pretty much going to be worthless once you get out in the night sky. So make sure you've got manual focus, and we'll discuss that. For beginning, I would not recommend exceeding more than a 50 millimeter lens. I would go shorter if possible, 24, 20, 14. That's going to give you a wider image, but it's also going to give you more area and room to make some minor errors and still come out with some nice shots. See if your lens has the ability to have filters mounted or screwed onto the face of it. Filters are a great benefit for what we're doing, but there's more than one kind of filter. So if you do have and like these screw-on filters, be careful which lens you buy them for, because if there's two lenses that you want to work with and they have different size filters, one might be a 57, one might be a 55 or a 52, you're either going to have to start buying multiple filters or adapter rings to get that onto the lens. The ideal way, and the way I personally go, is what they call a clip-in filter, because through this will fit into the camera itself. It'll fit between the camera and the lens, and you can in turn use several different lenses with that same filter. And as a result, in the filter, you can start taking out and deducting unwanted wavelengths of light, like your street lights. If you can't get out of the city, it'll help you immensely by taking care of some of that night light. The challenge with it is when you start adding a filter that's taking light away from a situation that's already low light, you're either going to have to go with longer exposures or faster ISOs. So keep that in mind as you work with things. And just for fun, some of these filters can even block out the moonlight, so you can do imaging in a full moon. So it's just a blast. It's amazing. Last thing you're really going to need is a tripod. Now, I don't want you to go out and spend just a ton of money on a tripod unless you just have that money to deal with. But at the same time, I don't want you to go to the local discount store and pick up a $15, $20 tripod. You need to get one that is sturdy. And you can tell from looking at it pretty much how sturdy it's going to be. A lot of them, the better ones, will have a weight limit marked on it in the specs. So you can kind of guess from there. Make sure that the head of the tripod where you hook your camera, make sure that it can go up high enough to get up into the sky and get the images that you're looking for. And make sure that it's got a way of attaching a weight. Usually to the bottom of that center post, there'll be a hook. Myself, I hook my camera bag on that once I get everything set up. That will all in turn add to the stability of your tripod. Now, if you've got one you want to try and it doesn't have the hook, once you get things kind of set up, take your camera bag and run the strap over your camera and lay it around the outside of the legs and hang it that way. That will also give you some additional stability. So that just kind of gives you a quick run through on the equipment that you need. Let's get more into the fun part, which is the exposure settings. How do you set your camera forward? Now there's basically 3 settings we'll work with that will help you reduce the noise and the depth of, adjust the depth of field and all. Unfortunately, a lot of cameras don't give you those options. If you have one, you're kind of stuck with what you've got. If it's a cell phone, as I said earlier, you can find some apps that will give you the capabilities. Again, the one I use is called Moment. The ISO, for those that have been around photography for a while, be kind of like the film speed we used to deal with. You're going to be dealing with higher ISOs than what you would normally deal with. Personally, I start off with at least 800 and go up a little ways from there. There's some limits, but it's not great. As you go up, that's going to improve your camera's sensitivity to the light that it's bringing in. But as it does that, it's also going to generate some noise, whether it's color, the grainy effect. And those are where you kind of have to start playing and weighing your camera and your equipment to see how it works out best. And myself personally, I try and keep my ISO between 800 and 3200. Anything above 3200, I start getting too much noise. Anything below 800, the exposures have to be too long. So that's just kind of a ballpark place for you to start. Now, if you want to learn more about ISO, there's lots of information on the web. You'll find charts like this, several things that can help you learn more about it. So, first camera setting is your ISO. The goal is to keep it between 800 and 3200. Okay, next we talk about the aperture. Now, the aperture is something that, at least for me, it seemed backwards when I first got into photography. Common sense, that you're talking about the aperture, the opening in the camera that lets the light in. So as the number got larger, it should be getting larger. When actually it's just the opposite. Because the f-stop number is actually referring to the amount of the lens that's blocked, not the amount that's open. So ideally, you're gonna be looking at low numbers. Here you see going down to f1.4. Those lenses are kind of expensive, but you can see as the numbers get down, they let more light in, which means you're going to get more data to the sensor in a quicker fashion. And you want to go as low as you can. There's a rule that I use. Most camera lens, the very outside of the lens itself, that is the poorest quality of the lens. So if I'm working with a lens that will operate at f1 1.4, I will always bring it back one stop to an f2. By doing so, you're going to block that one little ring around the edge of the lens that's going to distort, and you'll end up with much better images. So f4 or wider is what you're aiming for. Now, a lot of DSLRs today come with what they call kit cameras, and they'll have an 18 to 55 millimeter zoom lens that can go down to f4, f5. Don't run out and buy another lens right off the bat. Play with that one first. If you're looking to get something that is lower than that, there's a lens out there. It's commonly referred to as the Nifty 50. It's a fixed 50 millimeter lens that goes down to and the Canon at least, goes down to a 1.4 f-stop. It's a very good lens, and you can pick those up on eBay and Amazon for anywhere from 65 to 100, 125. So that's a very inexpensive way to get a faster lens while you're working with the learning process. So, excuse me. Camera settings, we're looking at an ISO between 800 and 3200. And your aperture or f-stop, go to the lowest or smallest setting, which will give you the widest, and then go back one stop to get good crisp images all the way to the edge of the field. Now, shutter speed. You've heard of, some of you may have heard of the imaging triangle, exposure triangle. This is the third side of it. Most of us are used to working in that left-hand portion of this little chart as far as shutter speeds. For night photography, if you look to the right, just keep going, and you're going to be out there somewhere. So it takes some getting used to, but you're going to be working with exposures of 15, 30, 60, 90, 120 seconds. And that's why you've got to have your tripod, your remote shutter, but that's also what's going to allow you to capture some incredible shots. So how do you figure out what the ideal shutter speed for your camera and lens combination. And how do you know what that is? Well, there's something called the rule of 500, which I like my images to be nice and sharp at night, so I bump it up to the rule of 600. And what that is your exposure time or shutter speed is equal to detail divided by the focal length of your lens. So detail, that's the 600. It's just somebody's done the math. So, but if you'll take 600 and divide it by, say you're using a 24 millimeter lens, your maximum exposure length and your shutter speed is 25 seconds. Anything beyond that, you're going to start getting star trailing and blurry. So now, that sounds nice and easy, right? Well, common, everyday, popular camera manufacturers are trying to get cameras to be as cost effective as possible for getting them more out, getting more sales, basically. So they have made the chips smaller, the sensors. That's what's called a crop sensor. In Canon EOS series, that crop sensor has a rating or factor of 1.6. Now, what does that have to do with your information? Well, now take your 24 millimeter lens, multiply it times 1.6, and then divide that number into 600. And all of a sudden, your 25-second exposure is now down to 15 seconds. So you can see you don't have a lot of time to get these images registered on the sensor. So that's why you've got to play with all three sides of the exposure triangle to get the best information you can. So as I said, now the rule of 500, some people say 400 because they allow for a little less accuracy. I use 600. The crop factor, if you want to find it, either go into your camera's manual or go on the manufacturer's website and look at the specs. It'll let you know. Then the focal length, of course, is the focal length of your camera lens. So what are our settings? ISO between 800 and 3200. Aperture as low or as large as you can, and then pull it back one stop. Your shutter speed, use the rule of 600. If you have a cropped sensor camera, do the other, okay? Now, we've got the cameras, we've got the lens and tripods, we've got all these formulas and pieces of information. How do we go about getting a great shot at night? Well, first off, and I'll bring this out from embarrassing experience, before you ever leave the house, first off, know where you're going. But make a checklist, write it down, get all your equipment, spread it out on the dining room table, and make sure you've got your batteries freshly charged, your lens, memory cards, preferably formatted and clean, ready to go, tripods, your headlamps, your camera. These are all things that should be on the list. Flashlights, water, coffee, whatever you need to have a comfortable evening. Trust me, you don't want to get out there and find out that you left the battery in the battery charger. That's an aggravating night. Now, personally, since I did that, I never go out for an evening of imaging with less than 3, usually 4 batteries, all fully charged that day. Memory cards as well. Take an extra one just to be on the safe side. Know your equipment. Now, on your camera, is it a full frame or is it a crop sensor? What ISOs are you going to use? What's the angle of your lens? Is it a 24? Is it a 12? And how fast is your aperture and where are you going to set it? Get that all figured out before you leave. And lastly, where are you going to go? There's lots of things online, light pollution maps, things such as that, that'll let you know whether a location is a good place to go or not. I mean, if it's got less light than you have here, then it's a good place. If you can go another 20 miles and get a lot less light, that's a great place, as long as you have good landscape. And whatever you do, always check the weather forecast. Because you surely don't want to be standing out there with all your equipment exposed and yourself out there and have 50-mile-an-hour winds come in or run off from a storm up on the mountain somewhere. Check your weather. And lastly, always scout out the place during the daytime. Sometimes you may get there and find a locked gate at night. Make sure you can get in. Make sure the scenery is suitable for the background of the sky that you're wanting to get. There's a program called Photo Pills, again, that will really help you make the plan, see how the spot's going to look. You can go all the way down to, if I'm standing here, the mountain's there, what am I going to see? So you'll know how it's going to look. So look into that. And by the way, clean your lens before you leave. That's a common issue. It's going to show up in night photography a lot more than it does in daylight shots. And leave early. Get there early so you can look around. Make sure you can get to the spots you want, get set up, and get there early enough. Look around. There may be another spot there that you'd missed that's going to be even better. So, how do you compose a shot in the darkness? Well, ideally, you don't. It's very similar to the daytime. You apply some of the same rules, but it's a lot easier if you do it in the daytime or during sunset. So kind of work that way, but keep in mind, the longer you wait, the more challenging the lighting is going to be for getting your composition and your focus right. If you're wanting to do some star trails, which is simply just longer exposures to purposely get the star moving, keep Polaris or the North Star in the frame. Gives a good point of reference to draw the image in and make it more interesting. Ideally, get there and start taking some shots before it gets dark. Use your cable release or remote shutter, your intervalometer. There again, that's another item. Make sure you got good batteries and backups for that. Your manual focus. I never go out without either a roll of what's called gaffer's tape, which you can buy online quite easily, or a roll of that blue painter's tape. Once I've established my focus in the daylight, I take a piece of tape, usually 2 inches long, and I tape that focus ring in spot. Lock it down. It's a lot easier to do in the daylight than it is once the sun is gone. Now, whether you've got a DSLR or a cell phone, you have an LCD camera or lens. Don't depend on that. It will deceive you. I could go into a lot of detail, but just don't depend on that to decide if you're getting a good image. And we'll cover that here in just a second. And if you've been in photography for a while, you're accustomed to bracketing your exposures. That also applies to nighttime. Make sure you've got that headlamp in there. Okay, the LCD. Remember we talked about the fact that you need to be shooting in RAW, because that keeps the camera from taking control of how your image looks. It simply captures the image, the data, puts it on your card, and you're done. The LCD is going through the same JPEG filter that it would be if you were shooting in JPEG. So it's going to go ahead and process that image on its own, the way it thinks it wants, looking for Aunt so-and-so's face in the image. And you will fuss and fight all night long, not knowing if you actually got a good image. Secondly, you're in the dark. Your eyes have adjusted to the dark, and here's a bright screen. It's not a dependable way to judge your image. Always go to what's called the histogram. With the histogram, you can see if, as in these three examples, is it underexposed by being all the information being off to the left? Is it overexposed, everything being over touching the right-hand side? Or is everything residing in the middle portion, not touching either side? That's where you want your histogram to be. Now, when you look at it, if you see it's on the left or the right, the solution is very simple. You have ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. If it's to the left, it means it's underexposed. Either increase your ISO or lengthen your shutter speed a little bit. If it's to the right, do just the opposite. Reduce your shutter speed or lower your ISO. Is one better than the other? That's up to you. There's no set way to do it. But once again, always, always, always be shooting in RAW. Locate your focus and lock it down. Now, very quickly, you want to, obvious things, you want to make sure that you include a foreground element. Just like in daytime, if you've got a beautiful mountain scene, if there's a tree you can kind of position in there, or something up closer that you can still get into a good focus, just to add that drama, add that depth. Same rules apply at night. Do it. And make sure you take a lot of test shots. Digital cameras are amazing. Doesn't cost you a penny to take an extra test shot to make sure your focus is tack sharp, to make sure your composition's good. When you take it, go around the edge, just like in daytime, go around the edge of your image. Make sure there's not something, little branch or whatever protruding into the image that will end up having to be cropped out. Just follow the same rules. You just have the different settings and have some fun with it. So ISO 800 to 3200. Aperture, the largest number or lowest setting that you can get on your lens, back up one. Shutter speed, use the rule of 600. If you have a crop camera, calculate that into it. You've got your maximum exposure times. Now, the hard part. Go have some fun, okay? Again, my name is James Carr. Got my email on the screen. If you've got any questions, any comments, if you would like to send us some images for us, get some feedback and suggestions on, feel free to send them to my email. If you would, just put "after sunset" in the subject line. Another source you have is the local astronomy club, the Albuquerque Astronomical Society. You can look them up on the web. There's a lot of people there that love to share knowledge. So be sure and give us a holler. I hope you enjoyed this and got some good out of it. So get out there, take some shots, make sure you share them with us so we can enjoy it with you. And just clear skies. Have a great day.